All his instincts told him that whatever Joanna was doing in the abandoned house, she would not bring Sidney with her to witness it. And as he'd thought, the cougar passed the turnoff to the south side that would have taken them to the address Jerry had given him. Will knew instantly where she was going. It was as inevitable as breathing. She exited at the Briarwood Avenue off-ramp and turned toward the hospital. He followed her, crawling through traffic thanks to a 3-car collision in an intersection up ahead. Bystanders gawked from the sidewalks in front of cafes and food marts. Sirens screamed as ambulances and tow trucks arrived from all directions. Will tensed at the too familiar sound and turned up the Bach on the stereo to try to drown it out. Ahead, beyond the overturned cars, the hospital loomed against the clouds like a massive animal, crouched, waiting. Finally, the intersection was cleared. He held back in the BMW as the cougar turned off into the long circular driveway of Children's and drove down into the dark mouth of the underground parking lot. Will braced himself and followed. He stepped off the elevator from the garage into the main lobby of Children's, into the cheery blast of multicolored neon lights, the aquariums and dioramas and gift kiosks, and the house-sized book with its endless list of names of hospital donors. Will turned to the escalator and fled the falsely carnival atmosphere. On the second floor, he was enveloped immediately by sense memories of panic and disorientation, the nightmare fog of the hospital. The pulse was there around him, ever present, the blip of monitors and the whispering of patients' families. Patients walked past him in an all-too-familiar daze, leaning into each other for support. Wizened children watched from doorways with hollow sunken eyes. The smell seemed heightened, nauseating, the sharp bite of alcohol and the sickly sweet stench of chronic illness. Will flinched away and walked faster through the gleaming corridors. He had not been back to Briarwood since Sidney was discharged, and the realization prickled him with guilt. It was Joanna, always Joanna, who took Sidney for her weekly checkups and blood work, the bi-weekly MRIs. It was Joanna who gave the glowing reports of Sidney's progress. Will had simply listened and accepted. The elevator up to the cancer ward was a level of unease all its own. Will stood stiffly, trying not to think about the inner halls concealed just behind his back, like termite tunnels in seemingly solid walls. But his heart was pounding and his palms sweating by the time the doors breathed open and he escaped into the yellow lobby of the children's cancer ward. He walked up to the circular nurses' station. Sandra, one of the regular receptionists, smiled up at him. "Hi, Mr. Sullivan. How nice to see you. How's Sidney?" Will felt a rush of dread but kept his voice calm. "Aren't they here today?" Sandra looked puzzled, scrolled through the appointment chart on the computer, polished nails clicking on the keys. "I don't have her scheduled for anything." Will was barely able to smile a goodbye as he turned away and into the maze of yellow corridors. Operating purely on instinct, he rode the elevator down to ground level and crossed the cool green inner hall to the wall of glass to look out into the children's side of the garden. Absent of snow, the garden was startlingly luxuriant, lush exotic plants and flowers in full bloom. The rain had relented, leaving water droplets on the glistening leaves and a thick ground mist, adding to the primeval illusion. Joanna was nowhere in sight, but in the sea of mist he spotted Sidney playing with some child patients among whimsical toadstool chairs, statues of gnomes and fairies. The children were engaged in some stalking game, moving through the exotic plants with croquet mallets, as if in a dangerous jungle on safari. Sidney suddenly lunged and beat at an invisible beast with her mallet. The other children followed suit, raising their mallets and beating the invisible creature to death. Will felt gooseflesh rising at the uncanny violence. There was a movement behind him, and he spun. Joanna stood in the dim greenish hall, looking surprised but guilelessly pleased to see him. "That was a fast luncheon." "Cancelled," he said shortly. "I didn't think Sidney had an appointment today." He knew he sounded like a prosecutor. She raised her eyebrows slightly. "She doesn't. We were going shopping, and I thought I'd stop and pick up this month's prescriptions." She lifted the pharmacy bag in her hand. Evidence. When Will didn't speak, she tilted her head, puzzled. "Is something wrong?" He spoke through a dry throat. "I don't know. Is there?" Again she looked faintly perplexed. "What could be wrong?" She stepped up to kiss him. Even that light brush of her lips was an erotic charge. "Any chance of you taking us to lunch, then?" He shook his head, feigning annoyed regret. "Some Kiwanis thing at 2. "Lucky them. Well," she ran a hand up his shirt, straightened his tie. "Be good." He looked into her eyes,